What if the most terrible thing isn't sleeping on the ocean floor, but waiting for you to wake it up? Imagine the Bering Sea, a dead calm in October, and our underwater expedition finds not just a sunken ship, but a steel sarcophagus from which something alive is protruding. Something pale and segmented like reptile skin. We thought it was a scientific discovery. We were wrong. We didn't haul a sample onto the deck. We brought aboard an alien with absolutely black eyes staring straight into the soul. But the real terror began when it vanished from the deck, leaving behind only torn chains. Remember this: when the lights go out on the ship, the GPS dies, and the power cables turn into black dust all at once. You realize you're trapped. You're not at sea. You're in a metallic box with something that's rebuilding your ship into a transmitter to signal home about its return. Joining the marine expedition in the chilling waters of the Bering Sea, we pursued a goal routine for our field, investigating a vessel buried in the deep. However, fate had prepared a different discovery for us, a sinister catalyst that aborted the mission and forever took one of us. Our research vessel, the Polaris, lay anchored 150 miles from the uninhabited shores of Alaska. A surprisingly windless calm for late October at these latitudes had persisted for 4 days, like a mystical lull before the inevitable storm. I, Elias, the senior deep-sea vehicle specialist, was methodically preparing our bathyscaphe, Triton 7, for the next dive. My partner, Irina, meticulously inspected the life support systems and communication equipment. A scientific cohort was aboard the Polaris, led by Dr. Eris Thorne, an oceanographer whose reputation was forged in the crucible of the most furious sea conditions. Officially, the expedition, funded by an anonymous private consortium, aimed to map and study the wreckage of a Soviet cargo ship resting here since the early 80s. The legend claimed it transported industrial machinery. However, whispers among the initiated suggested the possible smuggling of experimental navigation systems. This phantom trophy was our true objective. At 7:00 a.m., Irina and I took our places in the cramped, sealed sphere of the Triton. After confirming the hatch integrity, the deck crew, led by Brent, our deck chief, began the descent. Through the portholes, the water swiftly changed palette, from gray to deep indigo, and then to the absolute chaos of darkness, powerless against the vehicle's floodlights. The pressure mounted. We definitively said goodbye to natural light at the 200-meter mark. Our world was reduced to a patch of artificial illumination and the pulsating data on the instruments. The descent to the seafloor took about an hour. The seabed was flat, covered with a thick layer of silty sediment. Visibility barely exceeded 10 meters. We moved slowly, relying on sonar equipment which reconstructed the three-dimensional terrain. The transport wreckage was localized 20 minutes later. The vessel lay on its side, its hull disfigured by multiple ruptures, evidentially the consequence of impact with the bottom. The metal was covered in a thick carapace of corrosion and marine organisms. We began our inspection, following the scrupulous instructions of Dr. Thorne, whose calm, methodical voice was transmitted from the Polaris's control center. Eris insisted on inspecting the cargo holds, but they were firmly blocked by debris. Our attempts to clear the wreckage with the manipulator proved futile. After 3 hours of fruitless work, as we prepared to ascend, Irina drew my attention to the magnetometer. The instrument registered a large metallic anomaly 20 meters from the stern, in an area that, according to the sonar map, should have been empty, flat bottom. I steered the Triton toward the indicated point. The floodlight snatched a section of the seafloor from the utter darkness which seemed only slightly raised. Normal silt accumulation. But Eris was unyielding, ordering us to use the manipulator's hydraulic brush. Activating it provoked a dense cloud of suspension, completely engulfing the view. We had to wait several agonizing minutes for the suspension to settle. When visibility was restored, we saw it. It was a standard 20-foot cargo container, almost entirely buried in the seabed sediment. Its surface was strikingly smooth and almost entirely free of corrosion, an anomaly for an object that had lain there for decades. Vague symbols, resembling Cyrillic and digital codes, were faintly visible on one of the walls, but our attention was captured by something else. A breach gaped in the container's upper section, a jagged, torn rupture in the thick metal, roughly the size of a human fist, and a fragment was protruding from this rupture. We initially mistook it for a scrap of insulation material. It was pale, almost white. But when I zoomed in and maximized the image, my pulse quickened. This was not synthetic. The surface was smooth but divided into dense, closely fitting segments, similar to reptilian scales, but lacking the characteristic sheen. It looked soft, organic. Iris froze in the headset. A moment of silence, then the command. Inspect the container. We circled it. It was intact, save for this single wound. No doors, no locks, no hatches. Just a solidly welded steel sarcophagus. Eris made an instant, reckless decision. Bring it up. I objected, reminding him that our manipulator wasn't rated for such a weight. Lifting such a load from a depth of over 400 meters was a critically risky operation. Any failure could be catastrophic. Brandt, our deck chief, who overheard the conversation, also expressed deep doubts. This required the Polaris's main cargo winches, perfect coordination, and stable weather. But Eris's obstinacy prevailed. He contacted Captain Kylan and secured his sanction. The scientific value of the find, in the scientist's eyes, outweighed all safety protocols. We were ordered to secure the lifting slings. It was a laborious 2-hour job. The entire time we tried to ignore the breach, from which the pale, segmented flesh silently protruded. The ascent began. The Triton followed alongside, illuminating and monitoring the load. The winches on the Polaris slowly, at a speed of no more than half a meter per second, hauled in the cable. We were silent, listening only to the monotonous hum of the systems and the screech of the taut cables piercing the water column. I watched the straining tension sensor readings. Midway, I noticed the pale fragment had retracted inward. Eris accepted the information with indifference. When the container finally broke the water's surface, dusk was setting in. The deck crew, under Brandt's command, performed flawlessly. Irina and I left the bathyscaphe once the box was securely fixed on the stern. Emerging from the Triton, I felt gusts of sharp, icy wind. The sky was covered with low, menacing clouds. I approached the container. Its steel was icy to the touch, coated with marine slime. Peering into the breach, I sensed only the smell of stagnant seawater and absolute darkness. Eris Thorne was beaming. He was hypothesizing about a lost biological sample or an experimental survival program. Captain Kylan, more pragmatic, immediately ordered a 24-hour guard be posted at the object. Brandt, inspecting the crude but strong weld seams, confirmed the container was likely welded in place, a non-standard improvised artifact. The question of opening it was postponed until morning, pending weather improvement. The only way remained to cut an opening. The container was covered with a tarp. I descended to my cabin but couldn't shake the all-consuming feeling of dread. Instrument readings were normal, but my breathing was shallow. I was in a state of extreme nervous tension. I barely slept that night listening to the ship's sounds. But beyond the porthole was only inky darkness and the roar of the wind. Morning brought no clarity, but a deterioration of the weather. The sky was covered with a thick gray veil, the wind intensified, and the sea was topped with whitecaps. Breakfast passed in oppressive silence. Aris, with a face expressing maximum concentration, reviewed the images. Captain Kylan, jaw tight, watched the uneasy sea. He was displeased with the decision to open the object in such conditions, but couldn't override the chief scientist's order. On the deck, Brent's team deployed a plasma cutter, a powerful tool for slicing thick steel. All precautions were taken, but Eris, consumed by scientific hunger, moved right next to the cutting area, ignoring warnings. Brant personally took the cutter. A blinding blue arc flared, and a cutting, hissing sound ensued. Sparks were caught by the wind. The process was slow, taking over an hour. Finally, the last cut was made. Brant's assistant hooked the cut steel sheet with special grabs. It was pulled away from the container with a loud screech. The interior was not empty. The entire volume of the container was occupied by a second reservoir, made of thick, translucent material resembling reinforced glass, filled with a murky greenish-brown liquid. Dark outlines were vaguely discernible through it. Eris, nearly sticking his head inside, proclaimed, "It's a sealed capsule." After a short conference, it was decided to use a pump to drain the liquid. Brant drilled a small hole in the plastic wall. The pressure was atmospheric. A stream of murky water with an unpleasant odor, a mix of muck and some chemical reagents, flowed from the hole. Draining took about half an hour. The fluid level slowly dropped, and outlines gradually began to emerge. First, a metal grill and wide leather straps, and then, when the water dropped lower still, we saw it. It was fixed to the grill in a vertical position, a humanoid organism about 2 meters tall. The body was smooth, hairless, gray-white, like that of marine mammals. The muscles were developed but unnaturally elongated. The limbs were long and thin, with clearly visible webbing between the fingers. But the most shocking was the head, elongated backward, without earlobes, with a tiny nasal opening. The mouth, a thin, closed slit. And the eyes. They were disproportionately large and absolutely black, devoid of whites and irises, just 2 glossy, wet black spheres, and they were looking straight at us. Absolute silence reigned on the deck. Brant paled. Irina let out a muffled gasp. Eris, devoid of fear, stepped forward. In his eyes was only mad scientific curiosity. "It's alive," he whispered. He was right. The creature's muscles contracted barely noticeably, and thin, rhythmically twitching gill slits were visible along the sides of its torso. Captain Kylan was the first to snap out of it. "Everyone step back!" His voice was sharp and commanding. He ordered the container unhooked, stating the object posed an unidentified threat, possibly biological. An argument began. Eris demanded immediate transport of the creature to the laboratory, fearing its death in the air. Kylan insisted on quarantine protocols and the need to contact the shore. But at that moment, their argument became meaningless. Suddenly, within 10 minutes, a dense, thick fog descended upon us. It was a white, impenetrable wall consuming everything. Visibility dropped to 2 or 3 meters. Simultaneously, a scream came from the wheelhouse. All navigation instruments had shut down. The radar showed white noise. GPS, depth sounder communications, dead. We were cut off from the world, blind and deaf, in the middle of the icy sea. Kylan ordered everyone to wait. He returned from the wheelhouse 20 minutes later. His face was a mask of stone. "No communication, not a single instrument works. We will drift until the fog clears," he reported. He swept a heavy gaze over us. "Scientific inquiries are terminated. This object represents an unidentified threat. Brant, seal the opening. Use that same metal sheet, secure it with chains, as hermetically as possible." Eris attempted to object, mentioning the creature's need for air. Kylan raised his voice for the first time. "I don't care about its condition. I care about the condition of my crew. Execute." Brant and his men set to the heavy work in the pitching and slippery deck conditions. I watched as my gaze unwillingly returned to the creature. It hadn't changed its posture. The black, pupilless eyes tracked every movement. There was no fear or aggression in them, only total, all-consuming observation. I felt my mouth go dry with the realization that we were at the mercy of something beyond our control. The container was sealed again, now crisscrossed with thick steel chains. Kylan established a round-the-clock watch at the container and along the sides. The rest were ordered not to go out on deck unless strictly necessary. The next few hours were the longest of my life. I couldn't rest. The fog hung a thick white curtain. The horn sounded every 2 minutes, fraying nerves. Tension on board reached its limit. My watch on the stern fell at 4:00 p.m. I relieved the young sailor Corvin. I was alone with the fog and the chained sarcophagus. Time stretched endlessly. I listened to the sounds. Sometimes I thought I heard a faint scraping from inside the container, but attributed it to my imagination and the creaking of the chains. My watch was nearing its end. Spotting the blurred silhouette of my relief, I cast a final glance at the container and froze. One of the upper chains had slackened. The turnbuckle was tightened securely. How could this have happened? Approaching closer with the engineer, we realized something more sinister. An almost imperceptible, low-frequency hum emanated from the container. It felt more like a vibration passing through the deck. I tried to contact the captain, but the radio was silent. The hum stopped as suddenly as it began. I headed to the wheelhouse to report the slack chain and strange hum to Kylan. He listened silently, promising to send Brant to check. I tried to sleep. I woke up to a scream. Immediately following the scream, the alarm rang throughout the ship. I ran out onto the deck. The spot where the container stood was empty. The enormous multi-ton steel box had vanished. Torn chains lay on the deck. Their links were stretched and deformed as if pulled apart by incredible, inhuman strength. No drag marks, no crane operation. It simply disappeared. Kylan, face ash gray, was giving orders. "Who was on watch?" he asked. "Corvin," Brant replied. We started searching. We searched every compartment, shouting his name. The only answer was silence and the roar of the ship's horn in the fog. Corvin was gone. The container was gone. Only torn chain links and rapidly evaporating traces remained on the wet deck. I stood by the railings, looking into the white void, overwhelmed by a feeling of complete, unbearable despair. We were imprisoned on our own ship with an entity capable of dematerializing a multi-ton steel container and consuming a man without a trace. The main question hanging over us was simple and horrifying. Was it still aboard? The piercing, sharp alarm signal was silenced by Captain Kylan after 10 minutes. Its ringing was replaced by an oppressive silence, in which the measured, ominous roar of the ship's horn every 2 minutes seemed the only evidence of life. The search for Corvin was abandoned. We had searched every compartment of the Polaris twice. He was gone. Survival protocol: imprisonment in a steel box. Kylan gathered everyone in the mess hall. His face was ashen, eyes sunken. "Corvin is considered missing," he said in a firm voice, but his clenched fists betrayed his internal tension. "The container is gone. I cannot explain what happened. We are drifting, without communication or navigation, in zero visibility conditions. My priority is to preserve your lives." From that moment, the strictest regime was implemented. The crew, excluding those on watch in the wheelhouse and engine room, were forbidden from leaving the accommodation superstructure. Doors to the open decks were locked. No one was to go out alone. "We don't know what we're dealing with. We don't know if it's still aboard," the captain emphasized. "So we will operate based on the worst-case scenario." Brant was appointed responsible for organizing the defense, guarding the entrances, arming with everything available, Flares, fire axes, heavy tools. This was not a manifestation of panic, but sound calculation. No one objected. Even Eris, whose obsession with the find had been replaced by primal terror. I noted. His hands were trembling, his skin had acquired an unhealthy yellowish tint. We were all prisoners of a paralyzing horror. The next 24 hours passed in a daze. We were trapped in a steel box, drifting in a white void. The impenetrable wall of fog outside the portholes robbed time of its meaning. Life was measured by the changing of the guard at the locked doors and the monotonous horn blasts. I couldn't sleep. Closing my eyes, I saw the absolutely black, pupilless eyes of the creature and felt the phantom remnants of the low-frequency vibration. The crew reacted differently. Some tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, gathering in the mess hall. Others, like me, locked themselves in their cabins. Aris fell into a state of continuous agitation, muttering and avoiding eye contact. Irina, bringing me tea, broke the silence. "Do you believe this?" I replied that I didn't know what to believe, but I saw the facts. The disappearance of the container and a person, the simultaneous failure of electronics with the onset of the fog. She nodded. "I keep thinking about the breach. It was punctured when we found it, as if something was trying to get out, or get in." Her words made me look at the rupture not as a sign of hitting the bottom, but as a trace of violent exit. On the morning of the third day of drifting, a new unsettling event occurred. The electronics engineer, Gage, who'd been stubbornly trying to restore the equipment, burst into the mess hall in a state of extreme excitement. "Captain, I found something," he reported, gasping. I opened the main communications cable box. They're not torn, but they're altered. Instead of copper wires inside, it's a black, brittle substance, like coal. All the copper has just turned to dust along its entire length. This is physically impossible. We followed him. Gage demonstrated thick cables with the insulation cut away. Instead of shiny copper, dull black powder that crumbled at a touch. Kylan ordered an immediate check of all main systems. Power cables to the engine, control systems, emergency lighting. This news, spreading instantly, destroyed the remnants of the crew's self-control. If this decay had affected vital systems, we weren't just drifting, we were doomed. A dead iron barrel awaiting a storm. In these conditions, I realized that the Triton 7 bathyscaphe remained our only hope. An autonomous, sealed vehicle. I convinced Kylan to allow me an inspection. Brant followed me. In the dark, cold hangar, the Triton stood on its platform. An external inspection revealed no damage. I unsealed the hatch. Inside, it smelled of overheated electronics. On the left, pilot's seat, lay a flat, dark, shiny object the size of a fingernail. My heart skipped a beat. I carefully shone my flashlight. It was one of the segments covering the creature's body. Perfectly smooth, hexagonal, hard as chitin. Around it, a barely visible wet spot of that same slime. I slowly straightened up. The creature had been here. It had sat in my seat after our return. I simply pointed my finger. Brant shone his flashlight. The horror I felt was reflected in his face. "We brought it aboard. It was with us from the very beginning." He carefully placed the scale in a sterile bag. We sealed the hatch, locked the hangar. "Not a word to anyone until we report to the captain," Brant rasped. The realization was absolute. We hadn't locked the threat outside. We had locked ourselves inside, with it. The report to Kylan was brief and undeniable. The creature's biological material was found in the locked bathyscaphe. Conclusion: it can penetrate sealed bulkheads or possesses abilities we cannot comprehend. "So, it's been here all this time," Kylan stated, his voice cold as steel. "It disabled communication, it's disabling systems. It took Corvin, and it's moving about the ship at will. The plan changes. Defense no longer makes sense. We begin a sweep. Compartment by compartment. We will find it. This decision was met with grim determination. Sitting and waiting was agonizing. We were divided into 3 armed groups. Our area of responsibility became the technical decks and the engine room. We moved slowly, guided by Gage, who checked the cables. The deeper we went, the more dead systems we found. Copper turned into dust. This was a methodical, targeted destruction. Aris pointed to a ventilation grill, a thin film of organic slime. The creature was using the ventilation system to move. We were completely vulnerable. In the engine room, we found that the creature had disabled vital systems. The cooling system pump was dead. Its power cable turned to dust. We must stop. Aris suddenly trembled. He claimed this wasn't aggression, but adaptation, that the creature was studying the ship, and we were provoking it. It killed Corvin, Brant cut in dully, and I'm not going to wait for it to turn us into dust too. Their argument was interrupted by a radio call from Kylan's group. We found something in the 3rd cargo hold. All groups to our location immediately. The hold was a vast, cold space. Against the far bulkhead was the nest. It was a shapeless, enormous structure plastered to the wall, created from tangled bundles of dead cables, held together by the same frozen organic slime. The entire structure faintly pulsed and emitted the familiar, now much more powerful, low-frequency hum. But the most terrifying thing was what was in the center. Corvin's body hung in a cocoon of wires and slime. He wasn't dead in the usual sense. His flesh was integrated into the nest. Cables were grafted to his body. His chest cavity was opened, and instead of internal organs, a glowing biomass pulsed, connected by wires to the steel part of the structure. His eyes were burned out, absolutely white. Next to him, woven into the nest, were emergency batteries, the ship's radio beacon, and parts of the navigation equipment. This was a new organism, a new mechanism. The creature wasn't just destroying the ship. It was rebuilding it. It was using our technology and our biology, creating something new. Corvin was not a victim. He was a part. In the absolute silence that this pulsating mess plunged us into, the elongated head with smooth, absolutely black eyes slowly emerged from the depth of the structure. It wasn't hiding, it simply showed us what it was doing. And I understood. We were not the hunters, we were the raw material. Fear turned into a paralyzing realization of our place in this equation. The creature disappeared into the cables, having finished its demonstration. Kylan's voice was quiet but piercing. Slowly. Don't turn your back. We retreated, sealing the heavy hold door. Everyone knew it was pointless. The plan was singular, the Triton. Return to the hangar, disconnect the bathyscaphe, and drop it overboard. The whole ship felt alien. The low hum became a constant background. The ship was dying, or worse, reborning into something else. In the hangar, we worked in a feverish rush. 5 of us remained, myself, Kylan, Irina, Brant, and Eris. We manually unlocked the 4 hydraulic clamps holding the Triton. Eris was completely broken, sitting in a corner. Brant finished 3 clamps. Only the last remained. At that moment, the light went out. The hum sharply intensified. The ship shuddered. He's here. It knows what we're doing, Irina whispered. Everyone into the bathyscaphe. Quick, Brant yelled. I'll free the last clamp. We rushed to the Triton. I helped the stupefied Eris, then Irina and Kylan climbed in. Brant worked at the last clamp. Go! Close the hatch, he yelled. I knew he was right. Someone had to stay outside to finish the job. I sealed the heavy hatch. Inside the sphere, we heard 4 dull, metallic hammer blows. And then, a loud click. The clamp was open. At the same instant, the ship listed sharply. The Triton, unsecured, slid off its platform. It slammed into the hangar doors, which gave way and burst open. Our bathyscaphe plunged overboard with a deafening splash. We stopped at a depth of 20 meters. I turned the vehicle around. The Polaris's silhouette was barely visible. The fog around it swirled as if alive. The whole ship glowed from within, from every porthole, from every crack. The light pulsed in rhythm with the hum we still felt. The Polaris was no longer a ship. It had become part of that nest, part of the mechanism the monster was building. We slowly moved away from it, sinking into the saving darkness. We were picked up 58 hours later. A Canadian trawler, attracted by the Triton's beacon. Our story was dismissed as the ravings of madmen. The official conclusion: the Polaris encountered an anomalous storm and sank. The 5 survivors suffer from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. Not a single piece of wreckage was found in the crash area, but yesterday, the investigator accidentally left a sonar printout of the seabed on the table. That same square. In the place where there was only the old transport before, there is now an object of enormous mass and almost perfect geometric shape. And, most importantly, it is not passive. Once every few hours, an extremely powerful, short, low-frequency pulse emanates from it. A signal directed vertically upward into space. They think it's an unknown geological phenomenon. But I know. It wasn't building a transmitter to call for help. It finished its work. It fixed its ship. And now, it is simply informing home that it's ready for departure.